speaker on your system, you can't update any of your Sonos speakers. So if you have one old one and 20 new ones, you can't update any of the new ones.
Yeah.
So if a service
they're not
updates
compatible
their
with one
API,
another.
and
Hey Nick, can you make your
It's a speaker.
camera like you're not 16:9 anymore?
oh yeah, I don't know why that changed again.
Also, angle it down a little bit more.
Yeah, I don't know why you always like to
it's,
have your eyes
Oh,
showing.
it fell. The
Okay.
back fell. That's why. Wait.
Yeah, get your head in the middle there. You go.
So yeah, so I decided that's why I started this whole audio project, to get rid of Sonos. I didn't want to be stuck to one particular service. And so we started, and the other thing is the old speakers are between 2006 and 2015. So like a 2006 speaker, yeah, I mean that's 15 years old almost, but a 2015 speaker is only 5 years old. So you might have spent there. I've been reading, there's the home automation world's in a pretty big uproar. There's people that spent $10,000 on their systems 5 years ago, and Sonos basically was like, "Yeah, we'll give you a 30% discount, so you can spend another $7,000 to replace
That's
it."
weird, huh?
Yeah, I mean it's a So a lot of people are saying like it's a speaker, and it accepts an audio stream. So yeah, these particular systems can't do the streaming anymore, but they could have easily set it up so that the newer one does the streaming, and then just throws the audio stream to the old ones, because they can handle that, or sell like a bridge device that does that.
Well, I mean, they should. To me, it just seems like a firmware issue. Like, update the firmware so the old speakers just accept, input from a physical line in the back.
Yeah,
Because they all have a audio out port in the back of them, or most of them do, right?
Yeah, but the yeah. I mean, that's why I'm trying to get rid of all my Sonoses.
Just seems like a dumb problem. Like, hey, whoever thought this was just going to go swimmingly, and people were going to be like, yes, oh, please, let me have to throw out my speakers. Like, I was talking to Rob about this today. I'm like, there are people literally that bought speakers when they were in high school, and they're 70 years old today. They still have the same set of speakers, and they're using them. Why the hell would Sonos like just, oh, we're going to be an Internet of Things company? Like,
that's why I'm all local all the time. I mean, the only things that aren't local for me are my thermostats, and then things like Sonos that rely on an external stream, like Roku. But I mean, Roku is not going to brick Roku. It's like if Netflix goes away, I can use YouTube or I can use Amazon Prime. But like Sonos, like you can't even use local music on those anymore. Like they're literally bricking. So they issued a retraction like the next day, and the retraction was, "We're sorry that you feel upset about this. So instead, we're just going to do the exact same thing that we said we were going to do yesterday." The retraction was
we're sorry you feel like we're sorry you feel like we screwed you.
We're still going, but it wasn't even like we're changing course.
Sorry,
it was literally we're still going to do the same thing.
This is you, not me.
All right, audio check time. I think I'm good. How about you guys?
How's this?
My audio is great.
Yeah. Okay, I think we're good.
My cold is not.
Little soft. Let me see here. A little soft across the board. Bump it up a little.
Google does not like.
Is this going out on YouTube? Is that where the video is going to be going out?
We'll see. So this is our test run, but I think it could go there because I think I have everything right.
So is it automatically going to go to YouTube, or is it just
this isn't live. No.
Oh, all right.
No. It's not streaming.
I'm pretty sure that comment from Matt was the one that told me not to use page cache when I was having that issue in the commerce channel.
So
the Twitter comment,
right?
Yeah, probably.
He's the one that told me to do. He's the one that gave me that advice. That's so funny. I didn't realize you listened to the show.
Yeah, Matt's good people.
I don't know Matt.
He's awesome to work with.
Is he commerce guy?
Centauro.
Oh, yeah, okay, yeah. Well,
one and the same.
Yes. All right, I guess we're ready to roll. We have been recording, so We can.
So my Sonos rant is going to be.
So sorry, listeners, if you really love Sonos, but today's show brought to you by.
All right, so John, whenever you're ready.
All right, let's do this thing. This is Talking Drupal, a weekly chat about web design and development from a group of guys with one thing in common. We love Drupal. This is episode 234, Using Composer with Drupal. Good afternoon, internet friends. I'm John Picozzi, and joining me today, as usual, is Nick Laughlin and Stephen Cross. In this week's episode, we were talking about starting a new Drupal site with composer templates. Before we dive into that, let's find out what's new with you, Nick.
Good afternoon, everybody. So this week, if you're a patron, you can listen to our pre-show talk, but we're talking a little bit about a Sonos announcement. Sonos is basically removing support in a very unfriendly way for some of their older hardware. And I've been looking to get off of Sonos for about 3 or 4 months now. I think I've talked about the audio stuff. And so this weekend I installed a new speaker in my office. And so I covered actually have a couple of pictures. Maybe I'll share those in the newsletter. I covered my monitors and my desk with like construction paper, like that contractors put down to walk on, to try to mitigate the dust. And it was mildly successful. But I've got a speaker now that I can control my home automation system, but it is 100% local. So Sonos can't shut it off on me.
Well, Nick, you put the speaker in your ceiling, so it's not like just sitting on your desk.
Yeah, it's a in-ceiling speaker. Okay. And so I've got 3 of them set up in the house right now. One of them's in the master bathroom. One of them is in my office. One is in the basement right now. And I'm looking to set up one in the master bedroom.
Does a speaker coming from the ceiling have the same kind of sound that you got from Sonos?
I think it's a higher quality speaker. My wife notices the difference. I think she really is a huge fan of Sonos. But ironically, I've got a Connect amp set up, so she can still use a Sonos app herself to listen through these. It's the same. I didn't want to set up a lot of split speakers because those are a lot more work. So they're stereo speakers. So, and I mean, they sound great. They sound really good.
So who makes the speaker? Is it just like a generic speaker?
Monoprice.
And so I get can you page people on the speaker? So like somebody's in the bathroom, could you be like paging Nick?
So yes and no. So the audio switcher that I get is also from Monoprice. So it's a 6-zone, 6-source system. So you can have 6 sources you can cast to any zone or a combination of zones. And there is a PA input. So source 1 is the PA system. And if you send a 12-volt DC signal to the PA, then it will play whatever's in port 1 on every speaker. I've not found a way to send a 12-volt. I haven't found a commercial product that's easily integrated that works like that.
So in theory, you could tie that into like a home alarm system, right? And have like basically like a siren in every room, right?
Yeah, I mean the 2 or 3 main things I want to do with it. One is doorbell. So if somebody rings the doorbell, I wanted to send a tone everywhere. And then right now I've got some visual and audio notifications for the washing machine when it finishes. I like to set it up there so I can like play quick tones so that no matter where you are in the house, you know it's done. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff once I get that set up.
Get that creepy robot voice like the wash is done. so the second point here says you made ice cream. Was this also automated or was that
no? So it's kind of funny because maybe 2 or 3 years ago, my wife and I bought a KitchenAid stand mixer. And when we bought it, there was a promotion that gave you the ice cream maker bowl, and you're supposed to throw it in the freezer and it gets really cold and then you make ice cream. So we were really excited about that. We put it in our freezer and forgot about it for 2 years.
Someone cleaned out the freezer, huh?
Well, no, we'd see it and then be like, oh yeah, we should do that. And finally this week I was like, you know what? This has been in here too long. It's taking up so much space. We should try it out and see if it works. And so yesterday I didn't realize that you had to cook stuff when you were making ice cream. It was a learning experience. Basically, you cook everything, then cool it, and then heat it up again, then cool it again, and then throw it in the mixer.
Did you have rock salt?
No. I made chocolate. I haven't had a chance to try it, because another thing that I found out is the ice cream maker doesn't freeze the ice cream. It just adds air and like crystallizes it, and then you still have to put it in the freezer overnight. So
don't let it sit in your freezer for 2 years before you decide to eat it.
No. We made it actually yesterday, and so we'll be trying it today.
Great. So Steven, what's going on with you?
So speaking of food, I just added this to the agenda. I made. We always experiment making new things, and I've been trying to make Indian food lately. A couple of days ago, I made a saag, which is like a spinach-based curry. It's green. I had it with tofu. You usually see it on menus like with chicken saag, but I made it with tofu. It's really, really good. John's laughing his head off because of the tofu. Oh, okay. All right. You're muted, John.
I just found something funny.
Okay.
We can move on.
All right. That's interesting. So also this week, so I did a computer build a few weeks ago that I think I shared some information here on the show about. This week I set up that computer to start doing video recording. So we're doing a dry run this week of recording the show in video as we're recording the audio. So it's the first time I'm kind of putting this computer to real good use other than Drupal development work. So we'll see how this goes. We tried this a couple of years ago, and the equipment I had was not quite as good, and it was difficult to get things done. So hopefully it will be faster and easier this time around. So I'm not sure if this recording is going to make it up to YouTube, but that's the intent as we move along. So John, what's happening with you?
Coming off of Contrib Weekend, which was a huge success, not only here at Oomph, but also across the globe. Saw a lot of people contributing to Drupal core and to various modules. So that was super inspiring. And actually, our show topic today, I got to use one of the composer templates that we're going to be talking about for the first time this weekend, and it was pretty awesome. I enjoyed it. Also, getting excited for Drupal Camp New Jersey, which is coming up this weekend. It's my first time attending, and everybody tells me it's a great camp. So I'm really excited to check that out. All right, moving right along. Before we get into our topic today, want to follow up on some listener feedback that we got from our friend Matt over at Centauro. He was commenting on our last episode about caching. He said, was listening to 223. For all of the commerce sites I work with, we do not install page cache and only use dynamic page cache plus Redis. They do not use Varnish. We have this on a large site with 100 plus stores, and they also have a high cache cardinality. So, I think this goes to prove that there are a bunch of different ways that you can mix and match your caching structure. And, Matt's a super smart guy. I've had the pleasure of working with him on projects before. So, I'm sure that this approach is working great for them, but you can mix and match. You can do what you want, whatever works for your use case.
I just want to mention too that Matt, I think, is the one that gave me that advice that prompted me to mention that in the first place. When I was having that issue on a commerce site for a client, I jumped on the commerce channel of the Drupal Slack and was asking for some advice. And I think Matt provided the advice that ultimately fixed it, which was disabling the page cache. And so I want to thank you for that. I didn't realize that you were a listener. So glad to have you here.
I guess I don't know what I can't remember, Nick, what problem you were trying to solve, but the purpose of the page cache is for anonymous users, and if you're using
Yeah.
an outside caching system, I guess it doesn't make any sense to even have it turned
So
on, right?
So, well, here's the reason why it was an issue. I added a contributed module that allows you to have add to cart links on catalog pages. So by default, products only have add to cart links when you're on the actual product view, but if you product page or product display, but when you're displaying them in like a view or something, there's no add to cart link. And if you allow anonymous purchases, the add to cart link creates a token to determine that person's able to view that particular cart.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you have internal page cache turned on, then that token will get cached. And so the next anonymous person that tries to add something to the cart won't have the cookie on their local settings. And so it'll say, hey, you don't have access to add this to the cart. Disabling that took it out of the prevented it from being cached.
Right.
And as he mentioned, I've seen no performance decrease whatsoever by disabling that.
So we are planning on getting Matt and some of the other folks from Centauro on a future episode talking Drupal to talk about commerce. So maybe we can talk about this live with him.
Yeah, we had some additional follow-up from last week. We talked a bit about Lando and Docker running on Mac. And Nick, you had given me some advice on some additional things to try. So I did spend a couple of days last week doing some testing. And in my test scenario, which was really small one, which is basically spin up a basic Drupal site and do a build, I saw almost no difference on the Mac results. Like I could save an 8-minute job would maybe take 7.5 minutes or 7 minutes to do a build. So it was very, very little useful results. I mean, 10%.
So
10% improvement. 10% improvement is
So-
pretty good, but big picture.
I have some additional advice. So
Okay.
the listener, and you know who you are, who gave me the initial advice that I provided to you, said that an additional thing that could help on a Mac, which seems absurd to me, is if you run Ubuntu in a VM or Linux in a VM
Yeah.
and then Docker in that VM, it removes some of the abstraction that Mac does, and it can speed it up significantly. So adding an additional layer of abstraction can speed it up.
I've seen some reports on that. If you do a Google search on this basic, hey, speed up a Docker on Mac, you'll see a lot of people that recommend that.
Steve, was your test specifically around updating the folders that
Well,
Docker
so
was
it's
looking at?
doing it's a like a basic project startup that's using Acqui's BLT, and the build process is basically building all the artifacts for Drupal site. So it is significant I/O on your disk, which is why I thought I would see some results with some of the fine tuning that I did.
So I did the without much scientific research or benchmarking. I did change my my Docker, the folders that Docker was looking at after our last show about that, and I saw like a little improvement.
Yeah,
not
a little
anything,
bit.
Not anything that was like, oh my gosh, this is like working on a Linux machine.
Yeah.
All right. Moving into our primary topic, today we're going to talk about using Composer with Drupal and some of the projects out there to make that easier. Every project starts with a Composer Create project, or at least they should. As part of Drupal 8.8, a Composer project template called Recommended Project is now part of Drupal core. Today we're going to talk about our experiences with Recommended Project. So first off, let's ask the question. Prior to 8.8, what was everybody using to manage Composer projects, or Drupal Composer projects, I should say?
There's a project I can never remember the actual name, but it's like something like Drupal Composer, Drupal Project, I believe.
That is the exact name.
And so I always find it by Googling Drupal Composer Project, and it usually comes up. But it's I think it was started around, it didn't come out when Drupal 8 came out, because if you remember, Drupal 8 didn't start with great support for Composer in general. But shortly after Drupal 8 was released, I think it was sometime, I found it, I think sometime during Drupal 8.2-ish, this project was created, and very quickly, I think became the standard way to start a Drupal project. I know that every project that I've worked on since then has used this project as the base. So basically what it did is it pulls in a lot of, the two or three of the things that it really provides for you is it creates a web folder, subfolder for you. So it makes it very easy to create a subdirectory for Drupal, which is the recommended way to run it at this point. It includes some basics like Drush. I think it includes Drupal console. It handles scaffolding files, so things like index.php and settings.php. It handles a lot of that, or at least default settings.php. It handles a lot of those kinds of things for you out of the box, which is why I think it really kind of took off.
It's the only one. It's the only one I ever used. I'm not aware of any other than that. Drupal Composer Project, or whatever it was called. And I always did a Google search for it too every time I had to find it because I couldn't remember what it was called.
So there's always a roll your own option, and I know that our Drupal scaffold did use the Drupal Composer Drupal project. But we were always starting projects from our own scaffold using that project as one of the dependencies. So I think we're all in consensus here that maybe there was one other thing that everybody used, but as always, people can reach out if there was something else that we're forgetting. So with 8.8, apparently there are 2 templates included. Can one of you guys tell me what the difference is between them, and what the pros and cons of each are, maybe?
Well, I can talk about one of them. So one of them is called the Recommended Project, and I believe the other is Legacy Project. I've used the Recommended Project. I've not used the Legacy. I think Legacy just has a different structure that it outputs for you. And the Recommended Project, I think, is the one that they're looking at working with moving forward.
So is it more, the Legacy is more of like the flat file structure where your composer file is like in the Drupal root, or how does that typically present itself?
I can't answer that question.
Okay.
I don't know the answer to that. It says, I mean,
what was the question?
What's the difference between Legacy Project and Recommended Project? Is it, I think that's exactly it. Yeah. Do you want to ask that question again and I can answer it? I just read the page.
And I'm busy here, by the way, monitoring that the video's getting created properly. So I got a little distracted over here.
Yeah, no, that's fine. So yeah, if you want to, Steven, did you want to do that clap thing that you mentioned?
Oh,
it's too late.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. I'll sync it up. I'll sync up the audio later. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Do you want to ask that question again?
Yeah. So Nick, with Legacy versus the Recommended Project, what's the difference? Is the Legacy version just kind of like a flat file structure where your Composer JSON file is in kind of your web root?
Yeah, so it looks like the only difference is exactly that. Like whether the Recommended Project allows you to relocate the document root and the Legacy Project does not. And so In fact, there's a warning on the page that gives you some information about this, that you generally shouldn't use the legacy project unless there's something preventing you from kind of serving the files that way on your host. So, I mean, as expected, I mean, the recommended project is the one that they're recommending that you use.
Yeah, I would imagine the recommended project also is probably a little bit easier to set up with like a CI solution, right? Because typically you're building your web route for, and that's what gets pushed out to your server when you go through your CI pipeline.
Well, I mean, I think it's interesting that you mentioned that. I think we'll talk about this in a little bit more detail later on, but I think that you'll find in its current state, neither project is really good for a CI workflow, at least in the typical way that I've built them for the last, maybe 3 or 4 years using the Drupal project composer project, or the Drupal composer project. So there, as I mentioned, I think on last episode or maybe the episode before, when I was creating that personal home automation website, since it was the first Drupal site that I was building starting on Drupal 8, and it wasn't a client project, so if something went wrong, there was really nothing to lose. I thought I would try the new recommended project. And just kind of try it out and see what was there. I discovered a few things. I mean, there were, first of all, it worked. Like Drupal was installed. But there were a couple of problems. There were a couple of things that that kind of, quite frankly, kind of surprised me. And there were a couple of things that made working with it a little bit difficult. The first thing that I eventually noticed was that there's no get ignore file that's pulled down as part of that. So typically, or at least with the Drupal Composer project, there's a get ignore file that ignores a few folders out of the box. For example, it ignores all the core files, ignores all the contrib files, it ignores sites star files, so any uploaded files or cached JavaScript doesn't get added, ignores the vendor files, and I think it ignores pretty much every file outside the doc root that's automatically generated. Essentially, it's ignoring everything that's auto-generated by Composer. I did not realize this, and so for this particular project, I did my initial commit, and then I was doing some changes, tweaking some stuff, and I did a get status and noticed that there were hundreds of JavaScript cache files that had changed. And so I took a look and went, and was like, I must not have, something weird must have happened. And I looked into it and realized, nope, I had my entire vendor folder, everything was in there, contrib, everything. And so that was kind of the first issue that I experienced.
So going back to my CI comment, that would be one of the reasons why you would have to do some work before you could use it with the CI pipeline, I guess is what you were getting at, right?
Correct. I mean, unless your CI pipeline includes, I mean, I think the is it BLT that you use with Aqua, Stephen?
Yeah.
I think that the way that they handle CI, I think they create all those artifacts beforehand, so it may work in a situation like that. But in most cases, when I'm doing CI, like you're just committing essentially the composer JSON file and any custom stuff that you've got, the composer lock file and any custom stuff, and then the build process is pulling all those dependencies down and building the theme, there, and then using
the
some
BLT, the BLT CI does the same thing. It does the build on during the CI process.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So yeah, this would be problematic for BLT as well then.
Yeah. So I guess that is a factor, right? So if you're using kind of like a dumb CI process, right? Where it's not doing all of that fun stuff to build your assets. I guess you're just using this to move files, right? You could essentially use this and have it move those
Yeah.
files from one to the other. But ultimately, if you want to take full advantage of CI, you need to do some work.
Exactly.
I had the same exact experience, Nick, this week, and I think you and I started chatting on Slack about it. It was like, hey, does anyone know why git ignore isn't in here? And I just want us to drill into that a little bit. It seems that there's a little bit of discussion going on about whether git ignore should be included in that project or not.
Yeah. So Stephen found, after we were chatting about it, Stephen found excuse me. Stephen found as he mentioned, an issue that on Drupal.org talking about whether or not git ignore belongs in the recommended project. And since I had just used this, I had an opinion on it. I put in my 2 cents, and the basic school of thought was some people expect there not to be a git ignore there, and you can always just add a git ignore. The other school of thought, which is the school of thought I'm in, is that automatically generated files should not be in your git repo, and it's easier to, if you have a folder like that doesn't get added that you're expecting to be added, if you have a legacy CI workflow that needs all the files, it's easier to modify the git ignore and remove that line so that those folders get added than it is to remove and keep a clean project, all the generated files that got added inadvertently in the first place. I think the only
what is the opposing view to that that's valid? I mean, it's obvious that when this was initially created, there was reason to not include it because Drupal has always had it in. When you downloaded Drupal, the git ignore was always there, and now it's not.
It actually, that's not true.
Okay,
and that's the opposing view. So if you download Drupal from Drupal.org as a tar, there is no git ignore, and that makes sense because you're pulling down all the files, and if you're committing them, you need to have everything there. So you're not building from Composer, you're not building from somewhere, you're pulling down an archive. And so part of
the
concern,
you sure about that?
Well, I'm taking Greg Anderson at his word.
Okay.
But one of his comments says that that's the case. I mean, right. we can certainly verify that while I'm going through this. But and so it's never had a git ignore. It has an example git ignore, but it's never had a git ignore because I guess it's presumed that if you're downloading the files directly and you're committing it, you need to commit all the changes. So apparently one of the difficulties with this is if the way that the Drupal Composer create recommended project works is it builds off of that file system, that file setup essentially. So in order to get the git ignore in there, they have to add it to the root project. Mm-hmm. So they would be adding a git ignore file to the Drupal project when there's never been one. And there would also be an example and an actual git ignore, which would be confusing.
So let me see if I'm understanding this. There is no git ignore in Drupal core, right?
If you download it from, if you just download it directly as a tar.
But even if you pull it with Git, there's no git ignore added at that point, is there?
No, but the Drupal Composer create project does.
That's a function of that project, right?
Correct. Yep. Exactly.
So I mean, in theory, the recommend project, right, could add a git ignore to the top level alongside the Composer JSON folder and the web folder and all that stuff that governs the whole thing, right?
Apparently no, because it's built off the legacy project, which builds off of the same process that builds that zip. So they're doing it in a different process. I think and we're gonna get another listener correction based on my next statement, I'm sure.
That's what they're here for.
Exactly.
They keep us honest.
That's right.
But one of the problems, not to get too far afield here because we're going back and forth, but one of the problems with the Drupal Composer Create project or the Drupal Composer project is that sometimes updates are delayed. So a Drupal core update comes out, some process has to run so that the Composer project sees that update essentially and pulls it in. I think the way that the recommended project works, it's kind of baked into the system. So I would assume that updates to Drupal core would get seen immediately by the recommended or the legacy project because they're part of the same pipeline on the Drupal side. And so I think because they're pulling from there, maybe it's more difficult. Although, like I said, I'm taking, Greg at his word. There's a comment that he basically says that the way to get the get ignore in requires adding it there, which I could see being hugely problematic for people using the tar directly and suddenly adding something that was never there. Now, I would contend.
I kind of see. So I just went back and looked at a few zip files that I had in my download directory. So yes, I can't find a git ignore in any Drupal zip files that I downloaded in the past. But as we're going through this conversation, I'm thinking to myself, I always have a git ignore file. Well, that's because I always started with Drupal Composer project, and that had a git ignore in it. So it's never clear to me that wasn't coming from the core, it was coming from the Composer project.
Exactly.
Which I mean kind of makes sense. If you're not using not using Git, you're just downloading it from the website and putting it in a folder. Like, you don't really need that extra file. But I think the project,
I guess the issue I have is that the way to use a Composer project was pretty much through this project, and git ignore always was there, and now it's not.
Exactly. And I think that's the thing. Like, I think we really need to, Drupal Composer project has become the de facto way to do it. I think having a built-in Drupal way to do it makes sense, but if it doesn't take direction from the Drupal Composer project, then people just won't use the recommended way because it's missing too many features. And this is just one of the three problems that I discovered when I was using it.
So what are the other two?
So
I found some as well.
So it's interesting because experiences may vary, right? So as I said, I used this for Contrib Weekend, and I thought it was great. I thought it was easy to get up and running with Lando. You basically did a Lando init, and then ran the Composer create project command that they provide for you, and had Drupal up and running in a matter of minutes. I also found for testing Drupal, especially on Contrib weekends, or doing Contrib, it was really easy to switch versions of Drupal. So I did run into the next two issues that we have, but I thought they were easily overcome with Composer.
Well, yeah, to be fair, your statement about it getting up and running in a few minutes, the Drupal Composer project does that as well.
Yeah.
But it doesn't have these three other issues. So the second issue I ran into is that it doesn't include Drush. So you need to include Drush. Not a big deal. You can just run Composer require Drush/Drush, and that'll install Drush for you, right? Well,
if you use Lando, though, you're going to get it anyway, aren't you?
No. Lando relies on it being in the vendor directory. So it does some magic to automatically load it for you if it's there, but if it's not, then it doesn't. So you have to include it. You have to require it. And that is when I ran into the third issue. And so the third issue actually also has a warning on the page talking about the difference between legacy and recommended project. The permissions on the default folder are wrong, and you can't use Composer without fixing those permissions. So you run Drupal create project recommended project. Part of the Composer process sets the permissions on the default folder. Mm-hmm. If you try to run a Composer command again, it will error out saying that it can't affect the default.services YAML file because the permissions are wrong.
So I struggle with that a little bit because I I don't disagree with you. It is an issue. I ran into it, but you sometimes still have that issue even with the Drupal Composer Drupal project. Sometimes your settings.php file or your default folder will lock, and so much so that I've actually created an unlock alias in my command line tool to just basically say unlock and then give it the path and have it set the permissions correctly. So I don't know if you can necessarily blame that on the recommend project versus the Drupal Composer Drupal project.
Well, I mean, it was far more pronounced for me for this project. So every time I ran a composer project, it would reset it, and I would have to go in and change permissions. Whereas, like you said, I've had that problem before, like you have with the Drupal composer project, but it's rare that I have it on other projects. So it's something that happened to me very often.
So a couple of things that I actually found while I was trying to, as I said, was at Contribute Weekend, trying to contribute, trying to test patches and so on and so forth. And one thing I found was that it didn't have the patch plugin that comes with the Drupal Composer Drupal project.
Right.
It allows you to add patches right into your Composer
Right.
JSON. So similar to Drush, like it wasn't super hard to get set up. I just, Composer required the plugin and then added the configuration to my Composer JSON, ran a Composer install, and it started working again. But it's one of those things that you're looking at as like, hey, I need to be able to get going with Drupal, and sometimes Drupal needs to be patched. And granted, it's a third-party package, so it's there may be some licensing issues with including it. I'm not really sure about that, but it's one of those things where you're like, oh man, it would be super nice if this were added. The other thing I ran into was we actually use Composer installers to install other libraries via Composer. So like npm libraries and stuff like that. So having to get that set up also was another thing that I ran into. That's probably a little bit more specific to like the work that I was doing, but ultimately I was just trying to test a patch, and I needed those two things in order to get that patch tested with the recommended project setup.
But John, you wouldn't have had those with the Composer project, the Drupal Composer project either, right?
The patches you would.
The patches,
you would,
but not your other libraries.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if our scaffold goes ahead and installs the Composer installers plugin, but
I can check right now.
Yeah, it probably does. So I mean, that's just something that I would have to add. Let's move to our next segment here, because I honestly want to hear your feedback on this. So we have this in our agenda here. It says areas of improvement. Instead of talking about the areas of improvement, because I think we harped on a couple of things that we found that could be improved, right? What do you think the path forward for those improvements are? And let me frame this a little bit more by saying, is it that the recommended project gets updated to include some of this stuff? Or is it that the community creates some other script or plugin that we also include with this that does a bunch of this other stuff for us? What do you guys think?
We kind of already have the second one.
Yeah, we already have that second one,
and it's been proven to work.
So are you saying that second one being the Drupal Composer Drupal project?
Yeah, I mean, we already have that.
Yeah. I mean, and that's kind of I think it would be good to have it in core, so to speak, to have it supported directly by the people supporting Drupal core, which it is already. I mean, the people contributing to the Drupal Composer project, I mean, they're well-known names in the community, and they're certainly providing a great service, for having that set up. I mean, in my opinion, is these types of things need to be in that recommended project. I mean, as a developer, if they don't get added, like Drush doesn't get added, if I mean, I could probably live with Drush not being there. I mean, that's very easy to add. But like if things like but even things like the patching and get ignored, if that's not there.
But here's part of the problem with that, Nick. Sorry to interrupt you. Is that it's called recommended, and if you read the page around where they promote this on the Drupal website, it's like, for beginners, this is the way to start. And how can you like have a way to start without including an
Drush.
ignore file and Drush?
Well, so
I mean, is there anyone that would
depends.
recommend starting a Drupal project without that stuff?
So I
it's
guess
not. It's not called the bare bones. The bare bones project. It's called the recommended.
So I guess it depends on how you're defining the way to get started and what you're trying to get started with doing, right? So if you're just trying to get started with getting Drupal installed, this thing does it, and it does it great, right? If you're looking to like jump into like hardcore development with Drupal, there may be a couple of things that you wanna add here, right? Which we've talked about, to get up to the level at which you're used to.
Yeah, I mean, the truth of the matter is, if it doesn't get added to the recommended project or like a developer's stack or something version, I don't see myself using it. I mean, the inconvenience of having to, unless the Drupal Composer project stops being supported. I think.
So while you're pondering that thought, another question that comes to mind here is, with so many people in the community supporting the Drupal Composer Drupal project, do either of you know why we didn't just take the Drupal Composer Drupal project and include it in this kind of recommended project?
My guess is that it's very opinionated and has a lot of stuff in that they didn't want in it.
That's exactly it. And I think it was started by somebody that works for a particular vendor of hosting services, and so a lot of those opinions are related to how that particular vendor structures its projects. And so I think that there was some discussion about not having something that's vendor specific pulled into the core project, and I see the merits of that discussion. But I mean, like I said, as we've been talking about this whole show, I mean, there's other things that I feel are. I mean, I use the Drupal Create project on every Drupal site that I work on that's in Drupal 8. It doesn't, and I use it on many, many different hosting vendors with no problems whatsoever. It was very jarring for me I mean, the get ignore file, again, that's something that you can fix by adding something. Getting Drush in there, that's something you can fix pretty easily just by requiring it. Same thing with the patches. The permissions issue is a little bit more annoying. I mean, having to change it every single time, but that's like something that I think is agreed. That was a bug that's planning on being fixed. The other things are more of just convenience. It's one of those things like, why, I have to, every time I'm going to start a project, I have to remember to do these 10 things, or use one that already does those 10 things. And maybe a couple of other things that, I may not need. But the truth is, in some cases, even those things are nice too. So one of the things that I think the Drupal Create project, the Drupal Composer project does, is it provides a script in for the composer to delete git folders in contrib. So when composer pulls down something from source, it just clones it, and so there's a .git folder. And some of the hosting providers, they have their own repository. So when you try to add it, it's trying to add a submodule or something rather than just adding this actual files. And so the script goes through and deletes all those folders so that so it's clean. Now, that's one of those things that's vendor specific. Like, it was put in there so that the vendor could handle it. It would be easier to set up CI workflows for them. But I find that useful anywhere. I mean, I have clients that, the CI workflow is fairly custom built. It gets built on a Jenkins server, and then Jenkins essentially rsyncs everything over. And yeah, rsync could certainly handle those .git folders, no problem. But that's a lot of files to move unnecessarily.
Right.
So, and it makes the code base bigger, all that kind of stuff. So, the assumption, in my experience, the assumptions that the vendor that were made, to make things smoother for that vendor, have never been a hindrance for me. But I can see people not wanting to put something in core that responds to those. But then again, like I said, if the recommended project doesn't support basic things like Drush or Git Ignore or things like that, I don't see myself using it long term.
So, I mean, before we close, I'm looking at the Drupal Composer Drupal project, and not to beat a dead horse here, but like I'm just looking at the require statement for that project, and there are 4, maybe 5 things in this list that, if they were added to the recommended project, would like satisfy most of the issues that, right? So, composer installers, the composer patches plugin. I don't personally use Drupal console, but I know a lot of people out there do, so like that should definitely be in there. Drush, and then for me, the composer Drupal optimizations. I think that's super important if you're running a composer based project. I'm not familiar with some of these other ones like Drupal Finder and php.environment, but I imagine maybe somebody could make a case for those as well. But I think if you had those 4 or 5 things in the required project, I think it would be it would be in a really good place. Not to say that this first iteration isn't really awesome. I am really excited about it, but I think it has, as Nick said, a little ways to go.
Yeah, I think one of the best things about this is kind of I think there's a couple of good things about this. One of them is starting to really acknowledge how important Composer has come to the Drupal. It's kind of like the first real acknowledgement that Composer has become so important to the Drupal ecosphere. Trying to move this into core and provide a way forward with it. The second thing is, as Stephen mentioned, there's an issue on Drupal.org, and there's a lot of talk on there about the opposing views, the couple of different opposing views, and what the best way forward is. So it's not like somebody put this out and said this is the way it's going to be and that's it. There's active discussion on this particular topic, and people are looking for a resolution that causes the least confusion moving forward. And so I'm confident that we'll get to a place where it's usable. It may sound like it looking back, but this isn't a show to complain about the fact that the recommended project is missing some stuff. This is the first release that has had a recommended Composer project. It's more of just a discussion about something that we, the three of us took a look at in the last couple of weeks, and what we discovered.
I want to clarify. It is usable. It may not be usable if you're a developer in our situations where we need some tooling to make it more usable. It does work if you just want to install Drupal. So, in closing, if somebody wanted to provide us feedback or send us nasty grams about this episode, Stephen, where would they go about doing that?
So if you have questions, feedback, or would, like John said, correct us on anything, you can reach out to us on Twitter at Talking Drupal. You could also email us at show@talkingdrupal.com. If you would like to receive a newsletter, as I think we send one a week, maybe not always one a week, but it comes out with the show, you can go to talkingdrupal.com/newsletter. It gives some additional information about something from an episode. It could give some clarifying information, or it could just say, hey, the show is out and ready to listen to. So check it out.
Last week's included pictures of Legos that my son and I built. So, you never know.
That's right. Also, if you are interested in supporting the show financially, you could do that by becoming a patron. And you can go to talkingdrupal.com and choose become a patron. Anywhere from a couple of bucks to as much money as you want to give us, you can. Some of the benefits you get, one is you get to see this show in its raw format. So I said see, but it's more of hear. So we push the record button and at the beginning and record all the way through and then stop at the end, and that's what shows up on the raw feed. The one that shows up in your podcast feed is one that we've cleaned up all the little mistakes we've made. So if you want to hear how many mistakes we make, you can become a patron and listen to the raw feed.
I think the more interesting is the pre-show and post-show commentary that we have rather than all our flubs. But you get the pre-show and post-show as well if you're a patron.
I don't know. Sometimes we flub pretty hard. So
Oh, a couple of weeks
That's
ago.
right, John. That's right, John with an N.
that is true.
We had a show a couple of weeks ago that I was moving the front to the back and the back to the end, and it was pretty messed up.
It's like Memento.
Yeah.
Everything was backwards.
And Steven, if somebody wanted to contact you directly, how would they go about doing that?
You could just hit me up on Twitter at Steven Cross with a PH.
Nick, what about you?
I am Nixvan, Nicxvan, pretty much everywhere.
Awesome. And I'm John Picozzi. You can find me on all the major social networks at John Picozzi. You can find out about Umthink at umthink.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.
Bye.
See you next week.
All right, guys. Let me share my
That-
screen here for a minute.
That was the tightest show that we've had in
Yeah.
years.
I run a tight ship.
we had a very small we had a very focused topic. It was very specific. It wasn't
I like
very
it.
broad.
This was actually
Yeah.
a really good topic. I think, I don't know. I wonder if we'll get feedback. I look forward to somebody reaching out.
We'll get feedback if we said something wrong. That's how it works.
Well, actually, no.
Makes
The feedback
sense.
that we got from Matt,
Yeah.
we got from Matt wasn't
No, I know.
negative
but
feedback.
That's usually when it comes, is when we say something wrong. But here's my.
When I say something wrong.
I just couldn't stop.
No. I say plenty of stuff wrong.
Can you see my screen?
Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
I can see my
I don't know
hand.
what that's doing to the recording right now. But anyway, look
That's
at that.
nutty.
12 threads running here.
You got Steam running?
I don't Steam running, no. Where do you
Oh, I
see
mean,
that?
you get Steam.
Oh, I have Steam.
Not
Yeah,
running,
yeah,
but-
yeah. I installed it. Been playing with that, but that CPU's like not even during the whole show. I was like staring at this thing. It was very fun. I wonder if I've just
What tool is that?
I don't know. It's something that came with the install of Endeavor. I'm not sure what it's called.
Hmm.
It's on the menu bar. I gotta stop the sharing. I wonder if I just messed up the video. Where's my Zoom? I can't find my Zoom. Oh, there it is. Stop sharing. Yeah, still recording fine. Beautiful.
That's pretty cool.
It's always exciting to get a new computer.
Did you see my note in Slack there, Steven?
Yes, now I did see it during the show. That makes sense.
That's what I was laughing at.
I know, it's too funny.
And then I had that line.
You know, my wife said the same thing.
I had that line from Anchorman running through my head.
Which one was that?
It smells like a diaper full of Indian food.
Yes. My wife refuses to touch that stuff because it looks like, it's dark green and it's just fun.
Listen,
She's like-
Indian food is delicious.
my wife likes Indian food. She doesn't like things that are pasty green, which is what sog
Yeah.
is. It's a thick green.
I mean, it sounds like it appears.
Yeah. Oh,
You're
it's
like,
so funny.
hey, looks, it's Swamp Thing.
All right, guys.
All right. Catch you guys later.
All right, see ya. Bye.
Wait, thanks. Bye.